The crystal flute trembled in my hand, not from nerves, but from the sudden perfect stillness that fell over the room the moment my father rose. 60 pairs of eyes followed him. The low hum of conversation died like a snuffed candle. Even the string quartet in the corner let their bows hover, uncertain. He stood at the head of the long oak table, backlit by the chandelier's warm glow, glass raised as though he were about to bestow a blessing the world had waited years to hear. I had spent 28 years learning to read that posture. Shoulders squared just a fraction too wide, chin tilted to catch every reflected light, the small, rehearsed smile that never quite reached his eyes. It was the same stance he used in boardrooms, at charity galas, in every photograph where he needed to look like the man who built everything worth having, including me. My fiancé Elias sat beside me. His knee pressed gently against mine under the table, a silent anchor. I could feel the heat of his concern without looking at him. He had met my father only 3 times before tonight. He didn't yet know the full choreography of these moments. But he knew enough to stay quiet, to wait for my lead. Dad cleared his throat once, the sound theatrical in the hush. To my daughter. He began, voice rich and carrying, the way it always did when he performed for an audience. Who finally found a man desperate enough to take her off my hands. The words landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. A ripple moved through the room. Sharp intakes of breath, a fork clinking too loudly against porcelain, someone's chair creaking as they shifted. My aunt's smile froze mid-curve. Elias's hand found mine beneath the tablecloth and squeezed once hard. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh it off the way I had when I was 16 and he'd told a dinner party I was still working on my personality. Or when I was 22 and he'd introduced me at his firm's holiday event as the one who thinks she's going places. Bless her heart. Or when I was 25 and he'd congratulated me on my first real promotion by saying, loud enough for the entire open-plan floor to hear, even a broken clock is right twice a day. This time I simply looked at him. Our eyes met across the candle flames and half-eaten plates of seared scallops and wilted greens. The smirk he wore was familiar. Half challenge, half triumph, the look of a man who has just reminded everyone who still holds the reins. But something in me had shifted in the months since Elias proposed. Not anger exactly. Not even hurt, not the fresh, bleeding kind. It was quieter, colder, more certain. Years of swallowing his words had forged something unbreakable inside my chest. Tonight it finally felt solid enough to stand on. I rose slowly. The scrape of my chair was the only sound for several heartbeats. I lifted my own glass. Not high, not dramatically, just enough to mirror his gesture. My voice came out low, steady, carrying without effort. "Thank you, Dad," I said, "for the reminder of how far I've come without needing anyone's approval." The silence stretched, taut and shimmering. He blinked once. The smirk flickered, uncertain for the first time I could remember. Someone at the far end of the table let out a small, involuntary laugh. Nervous, disbelieving. A few heads turned toward me, then back to him, waiting for the counterstrike that always followed. But I didn't wait for it. I turned to Elias instead. His eyes were wide, shining with something fierce and proud. I leaned down and kissed him, soft, unhurried, right there in front of everyone. When I straightened, I addressed the room, not him. Elias didn't find me because he was desperate, I continued, calm as a still lake. He found me because I finally stopped hiding who I am to make other people comfortable. I set my glass down with a soft click. Then I sat. The quartet started playing again, tentative at first, then stronger. Conversation stumbled back to life in fragments. Awkward laughter, too loud compliments about the food, someone asking for the wine list again. My father remained standing a moment longer than necessary. Glass still raised like a flag no one was saluting anymore. Slowly he lowered it. Rank. Saturday. Under the table, Elias's thumb traced slow circles on the back of my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Later, when the cake had been cut and the guests began drifting toward coats and goodbyes, my cousin pulled me aside near the hallway. "That was wow," she whispered. I've never seen him speechless. I gave a small smile. He'll recover. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I wanted him to. Not the way he always had, by rewriting the moment until he was the hero again. Because tonight, for the first time, the story had changed narrators. And I wasn't giving the pen back. The rest of the evening passed in a kind of suspended animation. Guests lingered longer than they might have otherwise, as if afraid to leave the scene of an unfinished drama. They approached me in small waves, awkward hugs from distant relatives, murmured congratulations laced with pity, quick glances toward my father to gauge whether it was safe to speak to me at all. I smiled through it, the same practiced smile I'd worn for years in his orbit. Polite, impenetrable, giving nothing away. Elias stayed close. He didn't hover, didn't play protector in some loud, performative way. He simply existed beside me, refilling my water glass without asking, brushing his fingers against my wrist when the conversation turned too saccharine, grounding me every time the air felt thin. When my great-aunt pulled me into a corner to whisper that fathers say things they don't mean when they're emotional, I felt Elias's hand settle lightly at the small of my back. I thanked her, said something vague about appreciating concern, and moved on before the pity could settle into something heavier. My father didn't approach me again that night. He worked the room the way he always did. Handshakes too firm, laughter too loud, anecdotes polished to a high gloss. But I noticed the small tells. The way his eyes flicked toward me every few minutes, checking for cracks. The slight tightening of his jaw when someone congratulated Elias and me together instead of addressing him first. The extra glass of scotch he accepted from the waiter. He was rattled. Not broken, not yet, but rattled in a way I hadn't seen since the day my mother's funeral ended, and he realized the house would stay quiet forever. When the last guests finally trickled out, the staff began clearing tables with quiet efficiency. Elias and I stood on the terrace overlooking the garden, the night air cool against my bare shoulders. The string lights swayed gently in the breeze, casting soft gold pools across the flagstones. He turned to me, voice low. "You okay?" I exhaled, watching my breath fog for a second. "I think so. It doesn't feel like I thought it would." "What did you think it would feel like?" I considered it. Like winning something. Or like bleeding out. One or the other. And now it feels like clarity. I looked at him fully. Like I finally heard the echo of all those years and realized none of it was about me. It was always about him. Elias nodded slowly. "He looked smaller when you stood up." He did. We stayed out there until the house lights dimmed behind us and the caterer's van pulled away. Inside, the ballroom was already half stripped. Chairs stacked, linens folded. The long table bare except for a single forgotten champagne flute still holding half an inch of flat gold liquid. My father sat alone at the head, elbows on the wood, staring at nothing. I could have left then. Could have slipped upstairs to the guest room Elias and I were sharing, closed the door, let the night end. But something, maybe the same stubborn patience that had carried me this far, made me pause in the doorway. He looked up when my shadow fell across the threshold. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he said, almost conversationally, "You always did know how to make an exit." I stepped inside. "I learned from the best." A dry chuckle escaped him. "Touché." I pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Not close enough for intimacy, not far enough for hostility. Just close enough to be heard. "You could have said anything tonight," I told him quietly. "Anything at all. You chose that." He rolled the stem of his glass between his fingers. "It was a joke. People laugh at jokes." No one laughed. His gaze flicked up sharp. "They would have once. Maybe. But not anymore." Silence stretched again, heavier this time. I didn't fill it. I had spent too many years filling his silences for him. Finally he spoke, voice rougher than before. "You think I don't know what I did to you? I think you know exactly what you did," I said. "The question is whether you care that you're still doing it." He looked away, toward the dark windows. "Your mother used to say I had a gift for turning love into ammunition." She wasn't wrong. Another long beat. I never wanted you to feel small, he said at last. The words came out halting, like they'd been waiting behind a locked door for decades. Then why did you keep trying to make me feel that way? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was almost too soft to hear. Because if you stayed small, you'd never leave me. The confession landed between us like a stone dropped into deep water. Ripples spread outward, slow and inevitable. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but room. Room to breathe without the constant pressure of his gravity. I'm not leaving you, I said. I'm just not staying small anymore. He nodded once, barely perceptible. Understood. Good night, Dad. He didn't try to stop me. Didn't call after me with some last barb or plea. He just watched me go, the way a man watches a tide he can no longer command. Upstairs, Elias was already in bed, reading on his phone. When I closed the door behind me, he set the device aside immediately. I crossed the room, slipped under the covers, and curled against him. His arms came around me without hesitation. You talked to him, he murmured into my hair. A little. How'd it go? Thought about it. Like pulling a splinter that's been in too long. It hurts, but the pressure's gone. He kissed my temple. You were magnificent tonight. I was terrified. You didn't look it. That's the trick, I whispered. Looking calm while everything inside is screaming. I've had a lot of practice. We lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle. The creak of old beams, the distant tick of a clock downstairs, the soft rhythm of each other's breathing. I didn't sleep right away. My mind kept replaying fragments. The gasp after the toast, the flicker in my father's smirk, the way Elias's hand never left mine. But mostly I kept returning to that last quiet sentence he'd said. Because if you stayed small, you'd never leave me. It wasn't an excuse. It was worse. It was an explanation. And explanations, I was beginning to understand, were more dangerous than insults. Insults could be dismissed. Explanations demanded you see the person behind the cruelty. And once you saw them, it was harder to hate cleanly. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. What I felt was something sadder, something closer to mourning. Mourning for the father I'd needed and never had. Mourning for the man he might have been if fear hadn't hardened him first. But mourning didn't mean surrender. The next morning we left early. No dramatic farewell. Just quiet goodbyes in the foyer. My father shaking Elias's hand with careful formality, kissing my cheek with the same measured pressure he used on business associates. He didn't mention the night before. Neither did I. In the car, heading back to the city, Elias glanced over at me. You're quiet. I'm thinking. About how long it took me to realize his words only had power because I gave it to them. He reached over, laced his fingers through mine. And now I'm taking it back. The highway stretched ahead, clean and open. Sunlight slanted across the dashboard, warming my skin. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something I had to fight for. It felt like something already arriving, slowly, steadily, on my own terms. The weeks that followed felt like the slow turning of a tide, imperceptible at first, then undeniable. Back in the city, life resumed its rhythm, but something had shifted beneath the surface. Elias and I moved through our days with a new kind of ease. Mornings started earlier, not out of anxiety but anticipation. We walked to the corner cafe instead of rushing past it. We lingered over coffee instead of gulping it down. Small rituals, but they carried weight. They were proof that the air around us had changed. At work, the difference was quieter but no less profound. I had spent 6 years in the same mid-tier marketing firm, climbing steadily while dodging the shadow my father cast from the outside. He sat on the board of a sister company. His name opened doors and closed others. Colleagues who owed him favors treated me with a mix of deference and condescension, always careful not to offend the daughter, always quick to remind her she was still the daughter. I had learned to navigate it the way one learns to walk through a minefield. Light steps, eyes down, never drawing attention. But after the engagement party, the mines began to detonate on their own. Started small. A senior VP who had once dismissed my campaign pitch as cute but unrealistic, now CC'd me on strategy emails and asked for my input first. A client who had always routed approvals through my father's contacts began emailing me directly. When I presented quarterly results in the all-hands meeting, the room listened, not politely but attentively. No one interrupted. No one made a joke about me finally growing up. When I finished, the applause lasted 3 seconds longer than protocol demanded. I didn't crow about it. I didn't need to. The change was its own vindication. Elias noticed too. One evening he came home from his studio, where he restored vintage photographs, a quiet, meticulous craft that suited him perfectly, and found me at the kitchen table, laptop open, drafting a proposal for a new division lead role. "You're glowing," he said, setting his bag down. "I'm exhausted. You're also unstoppable." I laughed softly. "I'm just not shrinking anymore." He crossed the room, kissed the top of my head, then sat across from me. "Tell me what's happening at work." I did. The meetings, the emails, the way people now looked at me when I spoke, as if they were hearing me for the first time. He listened without interrupting, chin resting on his hand, eyes steady. When I finished, he said, "You earned every bit of this. Long before that night." "I know," I whispered. "But it feels different now. Like the last barrier fell." He reached across the table and took both my hands. "It did. And you tore it down yourself." We didn't speak about my father much in those early weeks. Not because we avoided it, but because there was no urgency. The story no longer revolved around him. Then the first real ripple reached us. Elias's phone buzzed one Saturday morning while we were still in bed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then handed it to me without a word. It was a message from his old college friend, Mark, who worked in private equity downtown. "Mark, heard your future father-in-law had a rough week. Lost the Henderson account. Word is the client pulled after someone forwarded them a clip from the engagement party. Said they didn't want to associate with that kind of energy. Brutal." I read it twice. Elias watched my face. "You okay?" he asked. I handed the phone back. "I'm not surprised. You're not glad." Thought about it. Really thought. "No, I'm sad. For him. For the man who thought tearing me down would keep me close." Elias nodded slowly. "Karma doesn't always feel satisfying." "It doesn't," I agreed. "It just feels inevitable." The next piece of news came through my own channels, quieter but sharper. A colleague, someone who had once been part of my father's inner circle, pulled me aside after a strategy session. She was nervous, glancing toward the hallway as though expecting him to appear. "I probably shouldn't say this," she began, "but your dad's been calling people, trying to spin what happened at the party, saying you were oversensitive, that it was just fatherly teasing gone wrong." Waited. She swallowed. "Most people aren't buying it. Not after seeing how you handled yourself. They're starting to talk about how he's always talked about you. The little comments. The way he takes credit. It's adding up." I didn't press her for details. I didn't need them. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. She looked relieved, almost surprised that I hadn't reacted with anger or triumph. "You're not mad." "I was mad for years," I told her. "I'm tired of being mad." She nodded, eyes shining a little. Then she hugged me, quick, awkward, genuine, and walked away. That night I dreamed of my mother. She rarely appeared in my sleep anymore, but when she did, it was always the same. Her standing at the kitchen window of our old house, sunlight catching the fine lines around her eyes, a half smile on her lips as though she knew something I didn't yet. In this dream she turned to me and said only one thing. "You kept the best parts." I woke with tears on my cheeks, but they weren't bitter. They felt like release. Months passed. Seasons turned. My promotion came through in October. Division lead, my own team, a budget I didn't have to beg for. Elias framed the offer letter and hung it in our hallway, right beside the black and white photo he'd restored of my mother laughing on a beach somewhere long ago. When I saw it every morning, it no longer felt like a memorial. Felt like company. My father called less frequently. When he did, the conversations were shorter, careful. He asked about the wedding plans. About Elias's work. About whether I was settling in okay. He never mentioned the party again. I never brought it up. One evening in early spring, he called while I was cooking dinner. Elias was out picking up wine. The apartment smelled of garlic and rosemary. I answered on speaker, stirring the pan. "Hi, Dad." Then, I saw the announcement in the industry newsletter. Division lead. "That's impressive." "Thank you." Another pause longer. "I'm proud of you," he said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he hadn't practiced. I closed my eyes for a second. "I know you are. In your way." Silence again. Then quieter. "I was wrong. About a lot of things." It wasn't a full apology. Never would be. But it was the closest he could come. "I heard," I said gently. He cleared his throat. "I don't expect forgiveness. I already gave it," I told him. "Not because you deserved it. Because I needed to be free of carrying the anger." He exhaled, a sound that might have been relief or regret or both. "I'd like to see you," he said. "When you're ready. No pressure." "I'll let you know," I answered. We said goodbye. I turned off the burner, leaned against the counter, and let the quiet settle. When Elias came home, arms full of bottles and a small bouquet of tulips, he found me standing in the middle of the kitchen, smiling at nothing. "Good call," he asked. "Good enough." He set everything down, came to me, wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. "You're okay," he murmured. "Not a question." "I'm more than okay," I said. And for the first time the words felt entirely true. Outside, the city hummed on. Cars, voices, lights flickering to life against the dusk. Inside, the apartment was warm, fragrant, ours. I turned in Elias's arms, kissed him slowly, and felt the last small weight lift from my chest. The story wasn't over. Life never is. But the chapter that had begun with a cruel toast had ended. Not in vengeance, not in tears, but in quiet, unshakable self-respect. And that, I realized, was the only victory worth having. The wedding came in late June, under a sky so clear it felt deliberate. We chose a small venue, an old stone barn on the edge of the city, converted years ago into something warm and unpretentious. Exposed beams, wildflowers spilling from galvanized buckets, long wooden tables that smelled faintly of cedar even after they'd been scrubbed. No orchestra, just a single guitarist who played soft acoustic versions of songs we loved. No spotlight dances, no endless receiving line. Just people we actually wanted there. Elias's parents, his sister and her wife, a handful of close friends from work and college, my cousin who had pulled me aside that night at the engagement party, and my father. He arrived alone, early, wearing the charcoal suit he always wore to important occasions. No +1. No flourish. He stood near the entrance for a long time, hands clasped behind his back, studying the rafters as though memorizing them. When I stepped out of the small side room where I'd been getting ready, he turned. For a moment we just looked at each other. My dress was simple, ivory silk, no train, sleeves that ended just above the elbow. My hair was down, loose waves because Elias had once said he loved the way it moved when I laughed. No veil. I hadn't wanted anything between my face and his when I walked toward him later. "You look." My father paused, searching. "Like your mother." It was the first time he had ever said it without a shadow crossing his face. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once, then offered his arm. "May I?" I slipped my hand through the crook of his elbow. Felt strange. Formal, almost fragile. We walked the short distance to where the rows of chairs began. Guests turned, smiles breaking across faces, but my eyes stayed on Elias. He stood under the rough-hewn arch, hands loose at his sides, watching me with the same quiet certainty he'd had the night he proposed on our fire escape at 3 in the morning. When we reached the front, my father stopped. He looked down at me, eyes brighter than I expected. "I'm giving you away," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. "But not because you belong to me. Because you never really did." I felt the words settle somewhere deep. Not dramatic, not tearful, just true. He lifted my hand, placed it in Elias's, then stepped back. No lingering kiss on the cheek, no whispered advice. Just a small nod, to me, to Elias, and he took his seat in the front row alone. The ceremony was brief. We had written our own vows, nothing flowery. Elias spoke first, voice steady but thick with feeling. "I promise to see you, really see you, on the days you feel invisible, on the days you shine so bright it hurts to look directly at you, and on every ordinary day in between. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. I promise to laugh with you until we can't breathe, to hold you when the world feels too heavy, and to never ask you to be smaller so I can feel bigger." When it was my turn, I looked straight into his eyes. "I promise to keep choosing you, even when it's hard. To trust that your love isn't conditional on my perfection. To build something real with you. Something that doesn't need applause or approval from anyone else. And I promise to keep growing, not because someone told me I should, but because being with you makes me want to become more of who I already am." We exchanged rings. Plain platinum bands we'd picked out together on a rainy Saturday. The officiant smiled, said the words we'd waited months to hear, and then Elias kissed me. Slow, certain, like we had all the time in the world. Afterward, the reception unfolded in the gentlest way. Golden hour light poured through the open barn doors. People ate, drank, talked in low voices. Laughter rose and fell like waves. Someone started a playlist on a portable speaker. Couples drifted onto the cleared space that served as a dance floor. My father stayed on the periphery at first. He spoke to Elias's parents, shook hands, accepted a glass of wine. But he kept glancing toward the dance floor where Elias and I swayed to something slow and instrumental. Eventually he approached. "May I cut in?" he asked Elias, formal as ever. Elias looked at me. He nodded. My father took my hand. We moved into the slow circle of other couples. He held me the way men of his generation had been taught. Proper distance, light pressure, eyes somewhere over my shoulder. For a while we didn't speak. Then he said, "I watched you tonight. The way you looked at him. The way he looked at you. I never gave your mother that." I felt the admission land softly. "I know," I said. He swallowed. "I thought if I kept you critical, you'd stay sharp, stay safe, stay mine." "It didn't work," I told him gently. "No," a small, rueful smile. "It pushed you farther away than anything else could have." We turned in silence for another measure. "I'm sorry," he said at last. The words came out rough and used. "Not just for the toast. For all of it. The years I spent making you feel like you had to earn my pride instead of just having it." I looked up at him. His face was lined in ways I hadn't noticed before. Deeper around the eyes, the mouth. Time had been carving him while I was busy surviving him. "I accept your apology," I said. "And I'm not saying it erases anything. But I'm also not carrying it anymore." He nodded, eyes glistening. "That's more than I deserve." "Maybe," I said. "But it's what I need." The song ended. We stepped apart. He didn't try to hold on. Later, as the evening wound down, guests began to leave in twos and threes. Elias and I stood near the doors, thanking people, hugging, promising to visit soon. My father was one of the last. He approached with his coat already on. "I'm heading out," he said. "Early flight tomorrow. Business in Chicago." He nodded. "Safe travels." He looked between Elias and me. "You too, take care of each other." "We will," Elias said, voice warm. My father hesitated, then reached into his inside pocket. He pulled out a small envelope, cream-colored, no address, just my name in his careful handwriting. "For when you're ready," he said. "No rush." I took it without opening it. Thank you. He looked at me a long moment longer, then turned and walked into the night. Elias slipped an arm around my waist. You okay? I think so. We watched his taillights disappear down the gravel drive. Inside the barn, the staff had begun clearing tables. The guitarist packed up his case. The last candles flickered low. Elias and I stayed until everyone else had gone. We sat on the edge of the dance floor, my head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. What's in the envelope? He asked quietly. I don't know yet, I said. Maybe nothing important. Maybe everything. I slipped it into my clutch. Whatever it held, letter, check, photograph, apology. I would read it when the moment felt right. Not tonight. Tonight was for us. We walked out under stars sharp enough to cut glass. The air smelled of cut grass and summer dust. Elias paused at the threshold, pulled me close, kissed me again, deeper this time, slower, like sealing something permanent. I love you, he whispered against my mouth. I love you back, I said. All the way through. We drove home with the windows down, radio off, just the sound of tires on pavement and wind rushing past. My hand rested on his thigh. His rested over mine. No words needed. Back in our apartment, we didn't rush to undress or crash into bed. We moved through the familiar routines, brushing teeth side by side, hanging the dress carefully in the closet, folding his suit jacket over a chair. When we finally slid under the sheets, I curled against him, skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. In the dark, I thought about the girl I had been, the one who flinched at every raised voice, who measured her worth in silences avoided, who believed love had to be earned through perfection. That girl was still inside me somewhere, quieter now, less frightened. She didn't need to disappear. She just needed to rest. And in Elias's arms, she finally could. The envelope stayed in my clutch on the dresser. Unopened. Unhurried. There would be time. For now, I closed my eyes and listened to the steady rhythm of the man who had never once asked me to be less. The man who had waited, patient and sure, until I was ready to be exactly as much as I was. Outside, the city breathed on. Inside, everything was still. And for the first time in my life, still felt like enough. The envelope waited on the dresser for 3 weeks. Every morning I passed it. Black clutch still zipped shut, cream corner peeking out like a question mark. Every evening Elias would glance at it too, never asking, never pressing. We had learned, both of us, that some things needed their own timing. It was a humid August evening when I finally carried it to the living room. Elias was at his workbench in the corner, bent over a cracked daguerreotype he'd been coaxing back to life for days. The room smelled of chemicals and old paper and the faint citrus of the candle we'd lit earlier. Outside, cicadas pulsed in steady waves. I sat on the couch, envelope in my lap. My thumb traced the seal, still unbroken, my name written in his familiar, slanted hand. Elias looked up, saw my face, and set the magnifying loupe aside without a word. He crossed the room, sat beside me, not too close, giving me space to breathe. You don't have to open it tonight, he said quietly. I know, but I did. The flap gave way with a soft tear. Inside 2 items. A single sheet of notepaper folded once, and a small, folded photograph. I unfolded the letter first. His handwriting was smaller than usual, careful, as though each word had been measured before being set down. My dearest daughter, I have spent most of my life believing that strength meant never showing weakness. That love, if it existed at all, had to be guarded like territory. Won, defended, never freely given. I was wrong. I was wrong about so many things, but most of all about you. You were never a burden. You were never a project. You were never too much or not enough. You were simply my child, and I failed, repeatedly, deliberately sometimes, to treat you as such. The toast at your engagement party was not a joke gone wrong. It was the last, ugliest expression of a fear I've carried since your mother died. That if I let you see how much I needed you, you would leave. So I pushed. I criticized. I diminished. I told myself it was protection. It was cowardice. cannot undo those years. I cannot erase the nights you cried in your room and I pretended not to hear. I cannot give back the confidence I chipped away at, piece by piece. But I can stop pretending I was right. I am proud of you, not because of what you've achieved, though those achievements are extraordinary, but because you survived me and still chose kindness. You still chose love. You still chose to grow instead of harden. The photograph is from your 5th birthday. Your mother took it. I had forgotten it existed until I went through her old albums last month. Looking at it now, I see what she always saw. A girl fearless, bright, already whole. I don't ask for regular calls or Sunday dinners. I don't ask you to forget. I only ask that you keep this if you want it, and that you believe this one truth. I love you. Have always loved you. I was simply too afraid to say it plainly. If you ever want to talk, truly talk, I will listen. No defenses. No rewriting. Just listening. With more regret than words can hold. Your father. I read it twice. The third time the letters blurred. Elias waited until my breathing steadied. May I? He asked. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, lips moving slightly as though tasting each sentence. When he finished, he folded it with the same care he used on fragile prints, then reached for the photograph still in my lap. I unfolded it myself. The image was soft-edged, colors faded to a gentle sepia. There I was, 5 years old, gap-toothed grin, hair in uneven pigtails, standing on a kitchen chair so I could reach the counter. My small hands were covered in cake batter. My mother's arm curved into frame from the left, holding the mixing bowl, her wedding ring catching light. But what stopped my breath was my own expression. Pure, unshadowed joy. No caution. No calculation. Just a child who believed the world was safe and good. Behind me, barely in focus, my father leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. But his face was open. Mouth curved in a smile that reached his eyes. Eyes that looked at me like I was the only thing in the room worth seeing. I had no memory of that moment. Yet here it was, proof that there had once been a version of him capable of unguarded love. Elias touched the edge of the photo lightly. She caught him when he wasn't performing. Yes. We sat in silence a long time. The cicadas kept their rhythm. The candle flame dipped and rose. Eventually I said, I don't know what to feel. You don't have to know tonight, Elias answered. Or ever really. Feelings aren't a test you pass. I leaned my head against his shoulder. I think I'm angry again. But it's different. It's not the old anger that wanted to hurt him back. Grief. For what we could have had. For what he threw away because he was scared. Elias kissed my temple. Grief is honest. I nodded against him. We didn't speak much more that night. I tucked the letter and photograph back into the envelope, placed it in the shallow drawer of the side table where we kept things that mattered. Elias's grandmother's locket, the hospital bracelet from when I had my appendix out, the ticket stub from our first real date. Not hidden. Just kept. The next morning I woke early, before the city noise started. Elias was still asleep, one arm flung across the pillow I usually used. I slipped out of bed, made coffee, carried 2 mugs to the fire escape. The air was already warm, promising another heavy day. I sat on the top step, knees drawn up, and watched the street below come awake. Delivery trucks rumbling, a jogger in neon, an old man watering plants on his balcony. I thought about the photograph. About the girl in it. About the man in the doorway. I thought about forgiveness, not the kind that excuses but the kind that releases. When Elias joined me, hair mussed, eyes still sleepy, I handed him his coffee. I'm going to call him, I said. He nodded, no surprise in it. When? Soon. Not today. But soon. Okay. I sipped my coffee, felt the heat travel down my throat. I don't know what I'll say. I don't know if I want answers or just acknowledgement. You'll know when you hear your own voice. I looked at him, really looked. The man who had never once asked me to explain my silences. Who had waited through every layer of armor I'd built. who loved me without footnotes or conditions. How did I get this lucky? I asked quietly. He smiled, small and sure. You stopped running from yourself. That's all. We sat there until the sun climbed higher and the street filled with sound. Then we went inside, made breakfast, planned the day. Ordinary things. Sacred things. Weeks later. October again. Leaves turning gold on the few trees that survived the city. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. Hello, Dad. It's me. Then softer. Hi, sweetheart. The word landed strangely. Tender and used. But not unwelcome. We talked for 23 minutes. Not about the past. Not yet. About the weather in Chicago. About a project I was leading. About the restoration Elias was finishing. A portrait of a woman from the 1920s whose eyes reminded me of my mother's. He listened. Questions. Laughed once, quietly, when I told him about burning dinner the night before. When we hung up, there were no promises of weekly calls. No grand declarations. Just a door cracked open wider than it had been in decades. I stood in the kitchen afterward, phone still warm in my hand, and felt something settle. Not perfection. Not erasure. Just possibility. Later that evening, Elias found me staring out the window at the darkening sky. You okay? He asked. I turned to him. I think I'm starting to be. He crossed the room, pulled me close. I rested my forehead against his collarbone and breathed him in. Clean cotton, faint cedar, home. The story of my father and me wasn't finished. Probably never would be. There would be stumbles, silences, maybe even new hurts. But the ground beneath it had changed. No longer quicksand. Solid. Mine to stand on. And standing there, held by the man who had never asked me to shrink, I finally understood the deepest truth of all. Self-respect isn't something you win once and keep forever. It's something you choose again and again, in every quiet moment after the applause has faded. I chose it that night. I would choose it tomorrow. And every day after. Winter arrived quietly that year, blanketing the city in gray light and early dark. Elias and I had settled into the small routines that felt like permanence. Shared grocery lists taped to the fridge. His darkroom chemicals lined up beside my work notebooks, the way we both reached for the same throw blanket on movie nights. The apartment no longer felt temporary. Felt like ours. My father and I spoke once every few weeks. Never long. Never heavy. He would call on Sunday mornings when the light was still soft, asking about the week, mentioning a book he'd read or a restaurant he thought we might like. I answered honestly but lightly. There were no excavations of old wounds yet. Neither of us seemed ready to dig that deep. Instead, we built something new on the surface. Fragile but real. One Sunday in December he said, almost casually, I'm coming to the city next month. Business meeting. Thought I might stay an extra day. If you're free. I paused, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Elias, reading across the table, glanced up. I'd like that, I said. We chose a neutral place. A quiet cafe near the river, the kind with mismatched chairs and windows that fogged when the cold pressed against them. Elias offered to come. I told him I needed to do this alone. The day arrived sharp and bright. Snow had fallen overnight, thin and glittering. I walked the few blocks bundled in coat and scarf, breath clouding the air. My father was already there when I pushed open the door, sitting at a corner table, newspaper folded beside an untouched black coffee. He stood when he saw me. We hugged briefly, awkward at first, then less so. You look well, he said. So do you. We ordered tea for me, another coffee for him, and sat. For a while we talked about safe things. The weather, the new bridge they were building downtown, Elias's latest restoration project, a damaged tintype of a Civil War soldier that had taken months of patience. Then the conversation slowed, the way a river pools before it decides to move again. I keep thinking about that photograph, he said finally. He nodded. Me too. I looked at it every day for a week after I sent it. Kept waiting for the version of myself in the doorway to disappear. He never did. I studied his face. The lines were deeper now, but the eyes were clearer. You were happy then, I said. I was terrified then, he corrected gently. Terrified of losing her. Terrified of being left with a child I didn't know how to raise. So I built walls instead of bridges. I let the words settle. I'm not asking you to forget that, he continued. I'm just grateful you didn't build the same walls. I looked out the window. Snowflakes drifted past, slow and deliberate. I almost did, I admitted. For a long time I thought shutting people out was the only way to stay safe. What changed? Elias. And then, realizing that staying small to avoid pain was just a different kind of pain. He nodded slowly. We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable, just full. When the coffee cups were empty and the cafe had begun to fill with lunchtime voices, he reached into his coat pocket. I brought something else, he said. Not a letter this time. He placed a small velvet box on the table. Opened it. Inside, my mother's wedding band. Simple gold, worn smooth on the inside from years of wear. She wanted you to have it, he said. I kept it because, I don't know. I thought keeping it meant keeping her. But it's yours now. If you want it. I lifted the ring. It was warm from his pocket. I do, I whispered. He watched me slip it onto my right hand, beside the platinum band Elias had given me. It looks right there, he said. We stood to leave. The door he paused. Thank you, he said, for letting me sit across from you today. I met his eyes. Thank you for coming. Outside, the snow had thickened. We walked a block together before he turned toward his hotel. I watched him go, shoulders straight but lighter somehow, until he disappeared around the corner. I stood there a moment longer, ring catching the pale winter light, then turned toward home. Spring returned in hesitant bursts, crocuses pushing through sidewalk cracks, longer evenings, the smell of wet earth after rain. Elias and I had started looking at houses outside the city. Nothing grand. Just places with yards, extra bedrooms, room for bookshelves and darkroom trays. We weren't rushing. We were dreaming aloud. My father visited twice more that year. Once in April, when the cherry blossoms were at their peak. Once in June, the weekend before our first wedding anniversary. Each visit felt less like an event and more like habit. We walked parks, ate at small restaurants, talked about ordinary things. Sometimes the past surfaced, not as accusation but as shared memory. He told me stories about my mother I'd never heard. How she used to dance in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. How she laughed so hard at bad puns that tears ran down her face. I told him about the nights I'd sat on my bedroom floor writing letters to her I never sent. One evening in June we sat on the balcony of our apartment. Elias grilling vegetables, my father and I drinking cold white wine while the sky turned pink and gold. You're happy, my father said. Not a question. I am. He looked out over the rooftops. I used to think happiness was something you earn through control. Turns out it's something you allow. Smiled. Turns out. Elias joined us with plates of charred zucchini and halloumi. We ate slowly, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. When the plates were cleared, my father cleared his throat. There's something I've been meaning to say, he began. We both waited. I've started therapy. The words came out steady, but I could hear the effort behind them. Twice a month. It's humbling. I don't like it much. But I'm going. Elias reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. That's brave, I said. My father gave a small, self-deprecating shrug. Late. But better late. We didn't press for details. We didn't need to. The fact that he was there, saying it out loud, was enough. Later, after he'd left for his hotel, Elias and I stood at the sink washing dishes side by side. He's changing, Elias said quietly. He's trying, I corrected. Trying is different from changing. But it matters. Elias dried his hands, turned me to face him. You're not the same person who sat through that toast 3 years ago. No, I agreed. I'm not. He kissed my forehead. I'm proud of you. Every version of you. The next morning we drove out to look at a small house on the edge of a wooded suburb. It needed work, peeling paint, overgrown garden, but the bones were good. Wide windows, a porch that caught the morning light. A room at the back that Elias immediately claimed as a potential darkroom. We walked the property slowly, imagining bookshelves, herb pots, a swing under the oak tree. This could be home, I said. Elias slipped his arm around my waist. It already feels like it. We made an offer that afternoon. Months later, after inspections, paperwork, the chaos of moving, we stood in the empty living room of our new house. Boxes everywhere. Sunlight streaming through bare windows. My father had driven up to help unload the truck. He carried in the last box, my mother's old recipe cards tied with twine, and set it carefully on the counter. He looked around. "It's good," he said simply. "It is." He stayed for dinner. Take-out pizza on paper plates because the kitchen wasn't unpacked yet. We sat on the floor in the living room, backs against the wall, laughing about nothing. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I'm glad you let me be part of this," he said. "I'm glad you wanted to be." He hugged me, longer than usual, tighter than usual. Then he shook Elias's hand, nodded once, and walked out into the night. Elias closed the door behind him. We stood in the quiet hallway, listening to the engine fade down the street. "You okay?" he asked. He nodded. "More than okay." We walked through the empty rooms one last time before bed. In the master bedroom, moonlight pooled on the hardwood. Elias pulled me down onto the mattress we'd dragged in earlier. No sheets yet, just blankets. I curled against him, listening to his heartbeat. "This is ours," I whispered. "All of it," he answered. Outside, crickets sang in the dark yard. Inside, everything was still. And still, after everything, felt like the truest kind of victory. If you enjoyed this slow-burn story of resilience, quiet karma, and reclaimed self-respect, consider subscribing for more original emotional narratives, character-driven tales, and heartfelt explorations of family, healing, and personal growth. New pieces drop regularly right here.